Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first ever edition of the Always Interesting Oilers podcast. Today, I want to talk about the future of the Edmonton Oilers. So, the Edmonton Oilers are a fairly interesting team, I think, at this point, because they've had some quite uncharacteristically bad seasons for a team with two superstars. Like, if you have two players with over 100 points in a season, I think it's only ever happened at three times, including this year with the Oilers in NHL history, that a team would have 200 points players and not score or not make the playoffs. Um, but I think the future still could be promising for the Edmonton Oilers. And of course, this is mostly based on the fact that they do have two superstars, and of course, acquiring elite level talent in the NHL is extremely difficult. Probably one of the hardest things to do. You can only really do it through the draft. Obviously, there's a few exceptions to that, like the Leafs picking up John Tavares, the hometown kid, for $11 million, or even big trades like Subban being moved around. He's one of the elite defensemen in the NHL. Like, there's a few exceptions, but primarily the way any team really gets elite level talent is through the draft. This is definitely the case with right shot D-men. That's kind of the talk of the NHL right now. Lots of right shot D-men are of really high priority and value for teams, and of course, the Oilers have a history with making a particularly red trade in Taylor Hall for Adam Larson, but it just shows you what the price for um, a good, top four D man is. Of course, that was a pretty bad trade. Taylor Hall turned out to be an MVP caliber player, and Adam Larson's been in our top four every season, which is nice, but really not performed well. Had some very bad moments this season when Oscar Klefbom was injured for the Oilers. But I think there's still a possibility that the Oilers bounce back this season and make the playoffs. Obviously, some teams are getting better around them. Calgary had a great season. Vancouver's young prospects are going to get better. Pedersen, really surprised everybody. Had a great season. Um, However, I think the Oilers really have kind of the two highest value players in terms of trade value in the NHL. Of course, Connor McDavid, highest value player, no question. Nikita Kucherov's great and all that, but he's older and definitely not kind of he's not the best player in the world like Connor McDavid is. But Draisaitl is the first player since 2011-2012 season to record over 100 points and 50 goals. Evgeny Malkin did it then. He had 50 goals and 59 assists. Draisaitl, of course, had 50 goals and 55 assists this season. But it's really surprising to me that Draisaitl achieved this, and it hadn't been done for 7 years up until this point. Draisaitl was really seen as kind of a 30-point, 60 or not 30 points, sorry, 30 goal, 60 assist type guy. I don't think anybody really predicted him to get 50 goals. If anybody was going to get 50 goals on this team, it was likely McDavid. People still predict that at some point in his career, McDavid will hit 50 goals. Might even be this upcoming season. But Draisaitl was never really seen as kind of an elite level scorer. Like, he's outscored Patrick Laine, Austin Matthews, John Tavares, all these other players this previous season. And he's really kind of, I think he gained a lot of confidence after the All-Star game, actually. He had a fairly good, season up until that point, and he was scoring at a higher pace than he had in his career. But after the All-Star game, like, he won the passing competition, and McDavid won the speed competition for the Oilers. But I think Draisaitl really realized how good of a player he was. He could come into the All-Star game and win a passing competition against these other great passers. I think it really gave him the confidence to realize, like, he's an elite player in this league, and definitely the best German player of all time. And I think he really kind of came into his own, gained confidence. He kind of had shown glimpses of the player he could be in the NHL in the 2017 playoffs when he was playing for the Oilers. He, probably was the Oilers' best player in that playoffs. He had, I think, 16 points in 13 games. Really had a hat trick against the Ducks in the second round. He was really, a phenomenal player, really dominant. Um, but he hadn't really kind of been consistently a point per game. He had, multiple 70 plus point seasons before that, but hadn't really broken out like he did this year. And so I think Draisaitl really, kind of showed the league that he's potentially a top 5 talent in the league. Like if he can maintain his production, I certainly think he can be. And so the Oilers will then have, 2 top 5 players in the league. If everything works out, this might be the only thing that works out for the Oilers. That just seems to be how things work for the Oilers. But if they do, then even if other players underperform around them, they just need a little bit more help than last year. Like even 2 months left in the season, this past season, the Oilers were only 3 points out of the playoffs. Of course, it was an uncharacteristically terrible season for the Pacific Division, but I don't expect them to, blow everybody out of the water next season, or the Oilers, I think, will keep pace with everybody, if not get better. And this is largely due to the really competitive training camp that the Oilers are going to have this year. Of course, they bring in and sign Mike Smith to compete with Mikko Koskinen. They needed kind of a 1A, 1B type goaltending situation because Koskinen didn't really have a consistent enough season. I think he was worth signing. I mean, his contract's, I think he's paid, like $4 million plus for, the 30 games in the NHL or whatever it was. That's a little extreme, of course. Shirley's final bad signing. But I would have liked to see a much smaller cap hit on Koskinen. I mean, he did play really well at parts in the season, but he wasn't deserved of a huge raise like that. It's hard to keep good goaltending, but I don't think anybody in the league, like, as soon as he signed for that, I mean, good for him. Obviously, get as much money as you can. I think players should always do that, get as much money as they can, because, who knows what will happen when the situation arises, but that was too much for Koskinen. Everybody thought it was a bad signing the day it signed, which is rare. It often takes a couple years, like Lucic. But it's good they brought in Mike Smith. I mean, he's older, but he still can be competitive. He was, of course, the Flames starter in the playoffs. They got swept, but I thought he played really well. I thought he was their best player even. So I'm a little surprised to see him go. Of course, they Oilers, couldn't have signed Cam Talbot because there was kind of a stigma associated with him. He let in a lot of early goals on 1 or 2 shots, and if the Oilers brought him back and the fans watching, in the first couple of games he let in 1 or 2 goals on the first 5 shots, then it kind of really would have deteriorated everybody's kind of interpretation of him. I think he's kind of a little bit shaky in terms of kind of his consistency and having confidence in himself. So I don't really think the Oilers could have brought back Talbot, because as soon as he made some sort of first initial mistake, the fans would have turned on him, and it would have been, oh, we're doing this again, frickin' Oilers, signing bad players that can't play, or players who've shown they're not good anymore. So I'm fine with the Flames signing him. I don't think he'll be particularly good. Of course, he had one really great season with the Oilers, but he really hasn't played up to an NHL standard average goaltender since. But, best of luck to him. Good luck with the Flames and his future. Anyway, going back to the Oilers' competitive training camp, of course, goaltending, Mike Smith, Mikko Koskinen, they'll compete for a starting job. I think that's really healthy competition that you need to have. On defense this year, it's actually quite interesting. So the Oilers have moved out Sekera. They might move out Russell. There's kind of rumblings of him. He's got a large cap hit. I quite like Russell. I think he's probably the best shot blocker in the world. Consistently has great shot blocking numbers. pretty great. Defensive player, obviously not a great puck mover at all, but I still like Russell. I think he's a really good character player for the Oilers, and I think they could definitely use him. I don't hate his cap hit; might be a little expensive at $4 million, but I don't hate it. I think they should keep him around if at all possible. Um, but there's gonna be some positions available. Obviously you got Darnell Nurse, Clapbaum, Larson, Russell. Probably a pretty solid lock for your top four this upcoming season if no trades are made. But and maybe there will be like in the second half of the year there might be some competition for those jobs. Like if Bouchard makes the roster or Bear. Yeah, I'll just go into some of the defensive prospects of the others. So you got Ethan Bear, which is a pretty good prospect. You got Evan Bouchard. Um, you got Dmitry Samarukov. All these players have played for Bakersfield. Bouchard played for in the playoffs a couple games for Bakersfield. He might end up playing the season there if he doesn't have a great camp or when they give him a first couple of games in the NHL, he doesn't, really do that well, then I wouldn't be super mad. Obviously, I like him to play well and play for the Oilers, but I wouldn't be against him having another season to develop in the NHL. Um, really over ripen him. Also on D, you got um, Philip Broberg, Brandon Manning. Brandon Manning, not. They'll probably attempt to trade him away or buy him out or something. I don't think he's an NHL caliber defenseman anymore. You got also William Lagesson, who's supposed to be a potentially NHL caliber D-man for the Oilers. Definitely could see him slotting in the bottom two pair. Logan Day, I don't think he's quite as competitive. And then Caleb Jones, which is also interesting. He was in the NHL last season for a fair number of games. He was playing as a top six D-man for the Oilers. He did quite well. Once he moved up to the top four, he didn't quite do as well. I don't think he was quite ready. So I'd like to see something like if you bring in, Bouchard or Bear or Jones or whoever has the best camp, whoever seems ready. I think those are the three most likely players to crack the Oilers roster at the start of the season. Then you would really see how they do, and if they do well, keep them in that spot. And I think one of those three players has a high potential to improve, and especially if it's Bouchard, I think he really has a chance if he has a good first half of the season to push for a top four spot. I'd also give him power play time. I think he's by far um, one of the best defensive prospects the Oilers have had in a long time. He's a great passer, tremendous shot, really a great asset for the Oilers power play. The Oilers haven't really had a great quarterback on defense for the Oilers power play. It's really been many, many years since they've had that. I don't really recall any great power play guy. They had Sheldon Surrey way back when, who had a great shot. But Oscar Klefbom, he's a little bit too kind of not offensively gifted. He can make some good, solid plays, but he doesn't really have the creativity or the deadly passing and shooting ability to be a great quarterback for the Oilers on the power play. But I think Bouchard really has got the skill set up perfectly for that. And I'd like to see him have an opportunity on the first line. I'd like to see him in training camp and in practices early in the season, playing with McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Chason, or whoever, Cassian, whoever they slot in that position from the net. I'd really like to see him quarterback the power play. Give him minutes, give him time. Obviously, if he looks really good, you can do that at the start of the season. But if not, you can throw him on the second power play unit and then practice throughout the season with him on the first power play unit. And if he, looks good, slot him in there, and hopefully the power play clicks. Because I think one of the major reasons the Oilers drafted him is because he could be a really, really great power play quarterback defenseman. Anyway, enough about Bouchard. Also, Caleb Jones has looked really well. Obviously, he's the brother of superstar defenseman Seth Jones. He'll give Caleb some tips and pointers, and I do see Caleb Jones becoming an NHL defenseman at some point in his career. He could even do top four. He's got some pretty good skating and puck moving ability, which is what the Oilers need. And with a combination of all these players, I think the Oilers really will have a quite competitive camp for defensemen this season, which is which is great. I really think a competitive camp is what you need to push your team. You also will have there's a lot of spots at forward position available. I think definitely with all the seasons people the players had last season, I think Lucic could be a fourth line guy, but it's really up in the air at this point. He hasn't performed well. He does add a bit of grit and intensity, but you got Kara, who I think is a much better skater. You got Kara, who I think is a much better skater, and Cassian, who is definitely a better scorer at this point of his career, and I think Cassian will even start on the first line, which is of course not great. I don't think Cassian's a first line player. He's probably in between a second and third line type guy, but and more lean towards a third line type guy. But that's just the Oilers' depth situation right now at this point. But I think there's lots of spots available. Hopefully, Puljujärvi. I know he said he doesn't want to play for the team anymore at this point, and he might end up going back to Europe. But I think that it's really likely that he ends up playing in Europe. I mean, there's the off chance that he, settles down and just decides to try it for the Oilers camp. I mean, it's like he's been traded almost this season. Of course, there's a few returning players for the Oilers, but I mean, new management, new coach. It should be a fresh start for Puljujärvi. I think he's really not going to get a better opportunity than the Oilers this season. I think it's getting pretty close to make or break for his career. The Oilers, if they do get a good trade partner and they, get some sort of return on them that they like, I think, fair enough. Somebody's willing to overpay, but unless somebody's willing to overpay, I would just send him back to Europe. The Oilers have offer sheeted Puljujärvi, so they retain his rights for the next couple of years, which means they that he can still go up to Europe, play season, really dominate over there, and then the Oilers can trade him with a higher trade value. If he wants to come back to the NHL. But yeah, it's kind of too bad, the whole situation with Puljujärvi, especially when he's drafted. I was really happy the Oilers picked him at fourth. Everybody thought he was going to go third. I remember there was even, rumors days before that draft that he could go, top two. He was really pushing for it. He had some great tournaments before then, but obviously it didn't turn out like the way we were hoping. If he had, it's pretty much all the Oilers need. We just need a little bit more offense at this point. But I think a very competitive camp. Hopefully Yamamoto, also another Oilers first rounder, not as high as Puljujärvi, but still, it's really important that your first round prospects turn out, because otherwise, you can't lose that hard at the draft and expect to be a playoff team ever. Um, yeah. Also, you got some really good AHL players. Joseph Gambardella really had a great season last year. He was over a point per game. You also got players like Patrick Russell, Colby Cave, who's on the roster, Cooper Marody, Josh Curry. A lot of these guys are going to challenge for fourth line, third line type spots. Also, Raphael Lavoie. I don't think he'll. I think he'll come into camp and do quite well. I don't think he'll make the Oilers roster right out of camp. I'd like to see Ryan McLeod make the Oilers roster this year. I don't know if he will, but I really like his player. I think he'd be a great third line center. I don't know what point of development he's in, but I really like that the Oilers picked him up last year in the draft. I think he can be a good center for the Oilers down the road. I think he'll be a number 3 if McDavid and Draisaitl continue to play on the same line, which I think they will. Um, of course, the Oilers are not going to be able to get an elite level winger to play with McDavid and or Draisaitl. So slotting them together, they really like playing with each other. Dave Tippett has said he's got no problem with them playing together, especially since they're really, really dynamic, really love playing together. Nugent Hopkins will need some help on that second line now. I've just seen an article that the Oilers are still looking to add another 20-point goal scorer, which would be really good to put Saw in either if they don't go with Cassian on the right side, then slot him in there, allow Cassian to play with Nugent Hopkins. I think that wouldn't be a terrible option. Obviously, I'd like to see Cassian on the third line producing because I think he's a more energy player and not quite a top 6 scorer, but this is just the other situation. But if Cassian remains on the top line, then obviously a 20 goal scorer, him, Nugent Hopkins, Chase on, whoever they're going to try to pick up. Could be a not bad second line. And then, of course, you got lots of competition at the bottom 6. And I think Ryan McLeod could really push for that third center role. I wouldn't put him on the fourth line. I think he's got a lot more potential, being a second round pick, to be a better scorer. So if he's not going to make the team on the third line, I would just allow him to play for Bakersfield. Obviously, you got to get young developing players with, relatively high potential, a lot of playing time they got to play. You can't have them playing, 8 minutes a night on the Oilers. I think that's really not a great tool to develop players. I don't think that hardly ever works. But yeah, I think there's a lot of competition coming into Oilers camp. Of course, they've signed a few more depth forwards, and hopefully one of them can have a breakout season and contribute to the Oilers. I think it's likely the Oilers won't be bad this year. They might be kind of on the fringe between playoffs or not. It's hard to count them out, man. Like, as an Oilers fan, it's definitely easier to be optimistic, but like with McDavid and Draisaitl, it's if they get 2 more 100 points and even the forward group is a little better, you get a little bit more offense out of them, it's really hard to discount the Oilers. And I think our defense, even though it's not, top tier NHL level, I think it if they can keep the puck on the net, and if in the second half of the season Bouchard really becomes a kind of our go-to power play quarterback, then, and even if he's, on the third pair still, but he's getting first power play time, I think that can be a really, strong lineup. And that's kind of the best case scenario for the Oilers, but it's not too ridiculously unlikely. Of course, you could have a situation where Draisaitl regresses to, I don't think he'll regress below 90 points. I think with 100 points this year, he's got a lot of confidence, believes in himself, and if he plays with McDavid all season, I think it's highly likely he'll get more than 90 points. Obviously, this year has so far been an outlier in his career, but he's still super young. I think he's 23. He's going to get better. I'm not really concerned about McDavid and Draisaitl. Ryan Nugent Hopkins, he would be like a really like one of the best third line centers in the league if he could be that, but I don't think at this point they can have McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent Hopkins down the middle. I don't really think that's feasible. One of them's got to play wing because we just don't have the winger depth at this point. I would have liked to see kind of some more aggressive pursuing of maybe a Brett Connolly. Of course, he got paid a fair amount, but I'm not really against that. Apparently, it's like 1 in 3 free agent signings on July 1st work out where the player plays in their plays to the standard of what their contract pays them for over half the contract. apparently only 1 in 3 times that happens. Of course, with Lucic, that didn't really happen at all. I remember the first season after we signed Lucic, people were calling it a down year, and it turned out to be his best season. People thought he was going to bounce back or do better, but he just, from the get go, almost was really kind of underperformed. Didn't earn his $6 million a year, and he's still on contract for like 4 more years. I think it's just really a terrible contract. If they can, or they somehow move that contract, that would be phenomenal. And it's really buyout-proof because of all the signing bonuses and the he does have a no move clause. So if Lucic is committed and he thinks, I can play on the fourth line here, and McDavid and Draisaitl are going to carry me to a Stanley Cup, and he doesn't want to leave, he can totally do that because of the no trade clause he has on his contract. Anyway, the Oilers, I don't think are going to be, pushing for the President's Trophy this year. They might squeak into the playoffs. But, I mean, even the frickin' St. Louis Blues still managed, after being last in the league, to make it to the Stanley Cup final. So I wouldn't count out anybody. And as an Oilers fan, it's always easier to believe with McDavid on your team. Let me know what you guys think. I'm, not too pessimistic about the Oilers this season. I think they can make the playoffs. I can think they do well. And we now know as soon as you make the playoffs, like, all bets are off. After Tampa and Pittsburgh and Calgary all got knocked out super, super early and being swept, like, anything can happen. I think the Oilers, all they need to do is make the playoffs. I think with a little bit more depth at scoring, they can totally do that. Um, and hopefully we can get another 20-goal scorer on the wing here, and we'll be not bad. I really like Ken Holland thus far. I mean, he hasn't made any great moves or whatever, but for the longest time, the Oilers have not been a stable franchise. And with superstar players, I think you just need to make a strong foundation around them, make it nice and stable. When he had his first press conference, all he talked about was making the Oilers nice and stable, and I think that really is a kind of a good solution to the lack of success for the Oilers for so long. If you can make a stable, consistent franchise with more and more players coming down the pipeline, you've already got your stars, you've got roster spots for people to become better. I think it's we really could develop into a great team in the next couple of years. Also, that Broberg pick at the draft, I at first didn't know who Broberg was, and I was a little surprised he came kind of off the board. But given what Yzerman did at 6, um, drafting German Moritz Seider, which I thought was interesting. Lots of people speculated that Ken Holland actually had Moritz Seider and was going to take him in at 8, but Yzerman, of course, being the Detroit GM now, stole that pick from Ken Holland after he took over as GM for the Red Wings. So I really don't hate picking up another D-man because, as I said earlier, you can't really acquire kind of top 2 D-men without drafting them. It's damn near impossible. Unless you got 9 million cap space and want PK Subban, I guess. But other than that, I think definitely drafting more defensemen is always not a bad idea. It's going to take him a couple years to really push for the NHL anyway. And this winger we were going to get, likely, like all the highly touted wingers from the U.S. development program or wherever, they likely weren't going to play or be a top level winger at the NHL level this upcoming season. So why not build a strong defensive core? Like, you got McDavid and Draisaitl for 6 more years. Draisaitl's contract lasts for 6 more years. If you can develop like some top 2 D-men, like Bouchard and Broberg in the next 6 years, like say 3 years from now, they're our top 2 D-men, and they're, maybe a not quite as good Victor Hedman type player, or, a bigger, taller, not quite as good Eric Carlson in Bouchard's case. Like, I'll take that, man. as our top two D man with McDavid and Draisaitl up front. Like, if we can really create a solid all around team and develop players properly, then I wouldn't be surprised if the Oilers pull a 1980s Oilers way throwback and win multiple cups in a row. Like, there's definitely potential for that with the best player in the world and McDavid on your team. So if they can build a strong enough base around him, they don't have to do it overnight. They're definitely going to have to make the playoffs, in the next 3 years, because I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that McDavid's like, if 3 more years of this shit go on, that McDavid's like, all right, I need to change the scenery. But with Ken Holland talking about stability, with drafting defensemen for the future, and with really having lots of roster spots on a competitive camp, I think the Oilers could be not bad this year and really great in the upcoming years. Hopefully that's how it works out. Of course, they could, continue their history and, make it 14 and 15 years with only one playoff berth instead of just 13. But who knows? Anyway, let me know your thoughts, you guys. This is really meant to be a discussion. If you think, oh, what I said was stupid, what I said you didn't really like, something you agreed with, let me know. This is a discussion. I'm just spitballing here, just mumbling along, being an Oilers fan, interested in what you guys have to say. I'm sure there's something dumb I said in here that you can find. Anyway, until next time, have a great evening, good morning, and good night, or wherever you are. I don't know if I'll keep that in here. I'm just talking up the cup. I might cut all this out, and only I will know. Ha ha ha. Alright, thanks for tuning in, you guys. Bye-bye.